Hello, I'm Sansby and welcome to Thanet Writers Meet Megan Garrett-Jones. I'm here with a performance poet and event organiser, Megan. Hello.
Hi Connor.
So to start off, let's talk about your background as a performer. You got to us through the London poetry scene, I believe, way back when.
Well, it's been sort of a long and rambling journey to performance poetry, I would say. So my background in terms of my training and education is from theatre. So I went to drama school and did a theatre degree. I moved from Sydney to London in 2012, and that's when I started going to poetry open mics in Peckham.
So obviously that gives you a different lens into the world of poetry.
Yeah, I still don't really consider myself a poet, although I perform poetry and I organise poetry events. I always wrote my own material for performance, so I'm more of a performance artist than an actor. So I used to make my own performances and write for them, and so that kind of got me into performing poetry, because when I moved to London I didn't have my sort of theatre networks.
Yeah.
So poetry open mics were actually just a good way to get on the stage and have people watching and listening to me.
So would you say that sort of beginning is where the brand Things with Words comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I love reading poetry, but even when I'm reading poetry on a page, I'm sounding it out, or I'm often reading it aloud anyway. And my favourite poetry is the poetry that works well read aloud and pays attention to, the soundings of words and the kind of musicality, which I think essentially most good poetry does.
Yeah.
But I suppose there's another step in Things with Words, because it's spoken word, and I kind of say expanded spoken word, in that I say that storytellers can come, actors can come and do monologues, musicians who write their own lyrics can come along. So for me it's the idea of Things with Words is what things can you do with words. So it's about doing things with words.
And very difficult to pin down as a writer. You're very keen on experimentation.
Yeah. I guess that comes from writing for performance usually has a kind of experimental element implied, because often it's looking at how writing relates to a time-based practice of performance, which isn't just on a stage. You can have durational performance. So I'm really interested in experimenting with different times of writing.
So how do you think that one approaches writing for performance for the page?
I think you have a better sense of not boring your audience, and that might sound a bit harsh, but slam poets know this because they write for a 3-minute format and they're getting judged. So it's not that different. That idea is not very different to slam poetry, which is a performance medium. I guess me having more of an interdisciplinary approach and promoting that at the Things with Words events is sort of what else can we bring in to keep the audience interested, keep their attention. So whether that is, considering using music, or, how the way you perform conveys, as much as what you're saying.
Is there a difference between reading a poem and performing it?
Yeah, definitely. It's really hard. I mean, I've seen people do it really well, especially if they've got, they're published, they've got a book with their name on the front. But I think it's much harder to entertain people when you're reading from a page. I really, I think when people perform from memory, it's so much more powerful. And I realise that not everyone can do that, and there can be some really amazing performances from the page. But as someone with a theatre background, like you never get up on stage on your final night with a script. So, you know, if if we can remember the lines, it really helps us. Yeah, and like once the lines are down, you know, you can bring it into your body a lot more, and you can play with it, and that's like, you know, it's really nice to have a, you know, as a performer, it's really nice to have a studio that you can just go into and, like, you know, say this part of your script or your poem, you know, 15 different ways, and just find out what sits best with, like, how you want to convey meaning.
I'm a big fan of voice recorders on phones.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And that's a process of editing as well, is listening to yourself, and then you're listening to yourself as your audience would hear you, and then you kind of go, oh, that sounds a bit funny, or oh God, I'm going on a bit there, or you know, etc.
So, final question. Did you want to talk about some of the work you've done with Screaming Alley?
Yeah, so Screaming Alley is a great kind of experimental cabaret night that's come out of Ramsgate, and that's on every month, last Friday of every month, and I've been pioneering what I've termed spoken word burlesque, or burlesque spoken word, and again, it's sort of like bringing in different performance modes, so, you know, there might be a bit of undressing and, you know, dancing and music, but there's always a poem at the heart of the act.
So it's another way of the poetry could be performed.
Yeah. So, like, the last one, I had a poem about a suicidal ladybird, and I painted myself red, head to toe, with black circles whilst reciting the poem. So that is just one example of the you know, the extremes that I think you can go. You can take poetry to if you're so inclined.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining me today. On behalf of Thanet Writers, I've been Connor Sansby, and this has been Thanet Writers Meet Megan Garrett-Jones.